The passenger's final gift. The rhythmic clatter of the Orient Express, a luxurious anachronism cutting through the desolate Hungarian night, was meant to be the soundtrack to their perfect anniversary. Leo traced the delicate curve of Clara's cheek with his thumb, her head nestled against his shoulder, the soft glow of the compartment's antique lamp painting her skin in warm, sepia tones. Outside, the world was a blurred canvas of snow-dusted trees and infinite darkness, but inside, their small world was a cocoon of warmth, old velvet, and the intoxicating scent of her jasmine perfume. "Happy 5 years, my love," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. Clara stirred, a soft smile gracing her lips, eyes still closed. Almost. Midnight in 3 hours. She stretched, a graceful, feline movement, and then propped herself up, her gaze bright, electric. "I have something for you." Leo's heart did its usual little flip. Clara, always with the gifts, always with the thoughtful gestures that spoke volumes of how deeply she saw him. "Oh, I thought we agreed no more grand gestures after the Eiffel Tower incident," he teased, referring to their absurdly spontaneous engagement. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and reached into the small velvet pouch she always carried. "This isn't grand. It's small, but important." Her fingers, slender and elegant, rummaged for a moment, and then she produced a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb. Its wings were outstretched, poised for flight, and a tiny, almost imperceptible silver wire formed a loop at its top. "It's a swallow," she explained, her voice softening. "For safe return. My grandmother gave it to my grandfather when he went off to war. She said it always brought him back to her. I want you to have it." He took it from her, the wood warm against his palm, surprisingly heavy for its size. It felt ancient, imbued with a quiet power. "It's beautiful, Clara. Thank you." He leaned in, kissing her deeply, a kiss that promised forever. This gift, small and unassuming, felt more profound than any diamond. It was a piece of her history, her family, and now, their future. He'd thread it onto his keychain as soon as they arrived in Venice. The compartment was a dream of Edwardian elegance. Polished mahogany, gleaming brass, plush velvet seats, and a large, ornate window that offered glimpses of the fleeting, moonlit landscape. It was their private sanctuary, insulated from the muted sounds of the train. Or so they thought. It was then that Leo noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, not from their compartment, but from somewhere just beyond their wall. Like fingernails on wood, insistent and rhythmic. "Did you hear that?" he murmured, his brow furrowing slightly. Clara, busy admiring the tiny swallow in his hand, looked up. "Hear what, love?" "Just a scratching. Like a mouse." He shrugged it off. Old trains had mice. It was part of the charm. They settled back into comfortable silence, the gentle rocking of the train a soothing rhythm. Leo threaded the swallow onto a spare button on his jacket, close to his heart. The scratching, however, persisted, a quiet counterpoint to the train's rumble. And then, he heard something else, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, as if someone were speaking just outside their compartment door, muffled by the thick wood. He glanced at Clara, but she was already dozing, her breathing soft and even. He must be overtired. He decided to stretch his legs, maybe grab a glass of water from the dining car. Slipping out of the compartment, he stepped into the narrow corridor. The air was noticeably cooler here, laced with the faint, metallic scent of the train and something else. Something faintly sweet and cloying, like wilting flowers. The corridor was dimly lit, the ornate sconces casting long, dancing shadows. Empty. Utterly empty. He frowned. Odd. He was sure he'd heard voices. He walked slowly down the aisle, past the closed doors of other compartments. A few had lights on, but there was no sign of life, no sound of conversation, no hint of other passengers. The silence, save for the train's rumble, was unnerving. He reached the end of the carriage, peering into the next. It too was deserted, its red velvet seats stark against the dim light. A shiver, unconnected to the chill in the air, traced its way down his spine. He dismissed it as an overactive imagination, a symptom of being cooped up. He made his way to the dining car, poured himself a glass of water, and returned to the compartment, forcing himself to relax. Clara was still asleep, peaceful and beautiful. He tucked the thin blanket around her, a protective gesture, and tried to lose himself in a book. But the scratching seemed to have moved. It was no longer outside their wall. It felt closer, like it was coming from within the walls themselves. The scratching persisted throughout the night, a subtle, unnerving presence that prevented any true rest. Leo would drift into a shallow sleep, only to be yanked back by a particularly insistent scritch or a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to slither through the cracks in the old wood. He tried to tell himself it was the train's natural creaks and groans, the settling of an ancient machine, but a cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. When morning finally broke, painting the landscape in a stark, frosty white, Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked, stretching luxuriously, and then a small frown creased her brow. "Leo, I had the strangest dream," she murmured, her voice a little hoarse. "I dreamt of being trapped in a small, dark space. And I could hear whispers all around me, but I couldn't understand them. And a terrible smell, like something sweet and rotten." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "Sweet and rotten," he repeated, his voice tight. That cloying scent in the corridor. He hadn't mentioned it to her. "Yes," she confirmed, sitting up fully. She still looked radiant, but her eyes held a hint of unease. "Did you sleep well?" He managed a non-committal grunt. "Roughly. Old trains creak." She gave him a knowing look. "You're worried about something. I can tell." She reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "What is it?" He hesitated, then decided to tell her about the scratching and the empty corridor. "It's probably nothing. Just a bit unsettling." Clara listened, her expression growing serious. "That is strange. I didn't hear anything, but I felt cold, somehow, even under the blankets." She shivered. "Let's go to breakfast. Maybe seeing other people will make us feel better." The dining car, when they arrived, was surprisingly desolate. Only a handful of tables were occupied. An elderly couple sat by the window, sipping tea, their conversation hushed. A lone businessman picked at his pastry, eyes fixed on a newspaper. The few porters moved with a strange slowness, their eyes unfocused, almost glassy. Leo noticed the same sweet, cloying scent here, stronger now, mingling unpleasantly with the aroma of coffee and toast. He tried to shake off the growing unease, focusing on Clara's bright chatter about Venice, about their plans for the anniversary. But he kept glancing around, his eyes darting to the empty tables, to the oddly subdued passengers. Was it just the early hour? Or something else? Clara suddenly frowned, pressing a hand to her temple. "My head feels a little fuzzy, and my throat is a bit scratchy." She coughed, a soft, dry sound. A cold dread seized Leo. He remembered Mr. Thorne from the story, the coughing passenger. He quickly pushed the thought away. No, it was just a coincidence. Clara was just picking up a common cold. They returned to their compartment. The scratching seemed louder, more agitated. Clara complained of feeling increasingly unwell, a persistent headache, a creeping chill despite the compartment's warmth. Her cough grew more frequent, more insistent, though still dry. Her complexion, usually so vibrant, seemed a shade paler. "Maybe we should ask the conductor for some medicine," Leo suggested, trying to keep his voice light, masking his growing alarm. He went to the compartment door, about to slide it open, when he heard it again. The whisper. Distinctly this time. It was close, right outside their door, and it wasn't in any language he recognized. It was a guttural, wet sound, like something speaking through a throat filled with fluid. And it was accompanied by a soft, almost imperceptible thump, like something heavy brushing against the door. He froze, his hand on the handle. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that whatever was out there, it wasn't a passenger. It wasn't the conductor. And it wasn't just passing by. It was there. Waiting. Listening. Clara, hearing his sudden stillness, looked up. Her eyes, wide and a little unfocused, were fixed on the door. "Leo," she whispered, her voice frail. "What is it?" He slowly backed away from the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Nothing, love," he lied, his voice a strained whisper. Just making sure it's latched. He knew it was a terrible lie. She could see the terror in his eyes. Suddenly, a loud, wet thump against the door, harder this time. The old wood groaned. The whispering intensified, becoming a chorus of guttural, liquid sounds, pressing in on them. And then, the faint, cloying scent of wilting flowers intensified, filling the small compartment, thick and suffocating. Clara gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Her breathing became shallow, ragged. "That smell," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like something is rotten, inside the walls." Leo grabbed her, pulling her close, his arms wrapping protectively around her trembling frame. "Don't worry, darling," he murmured, though his own voice was shaking. "We'll be fine. We just have to wait it out." He knew they wouldn't. The compartment, once their sanctuary, now felt like a coffin. The sickeningly sweet, cloying smell had intensified, permeating every inch of the space, burning Leo's nostrils and clinging to their clothes. It was the smell of decay, of something profoundly unnatural, mixed with the metallic tang of old blood that he could now distinctly taste in the back of his throat. Clara was worsening rapidly. Her cough was no longer dry, it was wet, guttural, racking her slender frame. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and a faint, disturbing greenish tint seemed to bloom just beneath the surface. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps, and her eyes, once so bright and full of life, were now glazed over, unfocused, staring into some unseen horror. The whispering outside the door had become a relentless, insidious chorus, a symphony of wet, guttural sounds that seemed to be actively trying to bore into their minds. It was like 100 voices speaking at once, but none of them human, none of them comprehensible. And behind the whispers, the scratching intensified, becoming a frenzied scrabbling, as if something large and desperate was trying to tear its way through the very structure of the train. "Leo," Clara choked out, her hand reaching for his, her fingers cold and clammy. I don't feel right. My head, it's full of voices." Her eyes, wide and terrified, flickered to the wooden bird, still pinned to Leo's jacket. A terrifying crash echoed from the next compartment, a sound of splintering wood and tearing metal, followed by a wet, triumphant shriek that sent a jolt of pure ice through Leo's veins. It was coming from the compartment adjacent to theirs. They were next. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that whatever was on this train, it wasn't just confined to the walls. It was spreading. And Clara was becoming part of it. He scrambled to the window, desperately trying to force it open, to find an escape. It was locked, bolted tight, designed for security, now a trap. He pounded on the glass, yelling, but the train's rumble and the unearthly sounds from outside swallowed his voice. "There's nowhere to go, Leo," Clara whispered, her voice fading, a mournful echo. She coughed, a violent, rattling sound, and then, with a sickening wet gurgle, a small, dark, glistening mass emerged from her mouth, dropping onto the velvet seat. It was vaguely slug-like, segmented, and it pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickly green luminescence. Leo recoiled, a choked cry tearing from his throat. The smell intensified, nauseating and overwhelming. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a cold. This was a nightmare made flesh, and it was consuming his Clara. Clara's body began to convulse, her limbs twitching erratically. Her spine arched, an unnatural curve, and her head snapped back, hitting the wall with a sickening thud. Her eyes, now wide open, were no longer unfocused. They were black, depthless, but behind the blackness, for a fleeting, agonizing second, Leo saw a flicker of the Clara he knew, a spark of pure, unadulterated terror, a desperate plea for him to remember her. "The swallow, Leo," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, distorted, alien. My final gift. Remember me." And then, her body began to twist, to contort, growing larger, more grotesque. The sound of tearing flesh, of snapping bones, filled the compartment, mingling with the unholy whispers from outside. Her face elongated, her jaw distended, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that glinted wetly in the dim lamplight. He couldn't watch. He couldn't. But he couldn't look away. The compartment door groaned, then splintered inward with a loud crack, revealing a shadowy, monstrous form, something large and twisted, its black eyes burning with malevolent hunger. It was one of the infected passengers, now a grotesque parody of humanity, its limbs elongated, its body distended. Leo, driven by a primal, desperate surge of love and terror, grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the wall. It was all he had. "Stay away from her," he roared, a guttural sound torn from his own throat. He swung the lamp, striking the creature's head with a sickening thud. It shrieked, a high-pitched, unnatural sound, and stumbled back. But it was too late. Clara, or what remained of her, was now completely transformed. She was a horrifying parody of her former self, her beautiful face stretched into a monstrous snarl, her body twitching violently. Her eyes, those depthless black pools, fixed on him. There was no Clara left, only the consuming horror. He knew what he had to do. The final gift wasn't just the swallow. It was the memory she had given him. The memory of who she was, before this. The memory of her love. And he had to protect that, at all costs. Even if it meant. With a guttural cry of anguish and a strength he didn't know he possessed, he tore a thick, heavy curtain rod from its mounts. He would make sure no one else suffered this fate. He would stop this. He saw the emergency brake lever at the end of the corridor, just past their compartment. If he could reach it. The creature that had entered their compartment, the former passenger, lunged at him. He dodged, barely, feeling the wind of its claws against his face. He lashed out with the curtain rod, striking its side, driving it back towards the shattered door. This was his fight now. He had to stop the train. He had to honor Clara's final gift. The compartment was a maelstrom of horror. The mutated passenger, a grotesque parody of a human, snarled and lunged, its black eyes burning with an unholy hunger. Leo, armed only with the heavy brass curtain rod, fought with a desperate, primal fury he hadn't known he possessed. Every swing was fueled by love, by grief, by the horrifying image of Clara's transformation. He struck, blocked, parried, the metal rod clanging against the creature's hardened skin with sickening thuds. The sound of snapping bones from Clara's birth intensified, a gruesome symphony of final mutation. He risked a glance. What had been Clara was now a writhing, amorphous mass, growing, consuming the velvet and wood, pulsating with that sickly green light. It was no longer a person. It was the source, the incubator. The creature in front of him lunged again, its elongated claws swiping at his throat. He ducked, the rod whistling through the air, narrowly missing his head. He brought it down with all his might on its leg. A sickening crack echoed in the confined space, and the creature shrieked, a sound of agony mixed with rage, its leg bending at an unnatural angle. It staggered, momentarily incapacitated. This was his chance. He had to move. He sprinted past the creature, ignoring its pained snarls, ignoring the horrifying sounds from Clara's birth. His eyes were fixed on the emergency brake lever at the far end of the corridor. It was shrouded in shadow, a beacon of desperate hope. The corridor was a nightmare. Doors hung ajar, revealing scenes of similar transformation, of shattered furniture and dark, glistening stains on the walls. The sweet, cloying scent was overwhelming here, burning his throat, making his eyes water. He could hear faint whispers, gurgling sounds, and the relentless, agitated scratching coming from within the walls themselves, as if the entire train was alive, festering. He ran, his legs pumping, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The train swayed violently, throwing him against the wall, but he pushed through the pain, through the terror. He could feel something moving behind him, the injured creature from their compartment, scrabbling after him, faster than it should be. He reached the brake lever, a large, rusted handle. His fingers, trembling, fumbled for it. It was stiff, refusing to budge. He pulled, grunting with effort, every muscle screaming. It wouldn't move. Suddenly, a loud, wet thud directly behind him. The creature was there, a dark, hulking shadow, its black eyes gleaming. It let out a low, guttural growl, its distorted mouth opening, revealing those needle-sharp teeth. Leo knew this was it. He wouldn't make it. But then, his gaze fell on the tiny wooden swallow, still pinned to his jacket. Clara's final gift. Her promise of safe return. It sparked a desperate, final surge of defiance. He wouldn't return to her. But he could stop this. For her. With a roar of pure, unadulterated anguish and resolve, he turned and faced the creature, not to fight it, but to distract it. He grabbed a small, ornate fire extinguisher from its mount on the wall, its unexpected weight a small comfort. He threw it with all his might at the creature's face. It connected with a sickening crack. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and staggered back, momentarily stunned. That was all he needed. With a desperate grunt, Leo slammed his entire body against the emergency brake lever. The old metal shrieked in protest, sparks flying, and with a final, agonizing groan, the lever began to move. A deafening, metal-on-metal screech ripped through the train as the brakes engaged with a violent jolt. The train bucked and swayed, threatening to rip itself apart. Glass shattered, wood groaned, and the sounds of collapsing structures filled the air. The creature behind him roared in fury and pain, losing its balance, tumbling down the corridor. Leo held on, his body pressed against the wall, his teeth gritted. The train was slowing, grinding, screeching. Then, with a final, violent lurch, a jarring impact, it came to a shuddering halt. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. He was thrown forward by the final jolt, landing hard on the floor. He lay there, gasping, shaking, his body screaming in pain, his mind reeling. He pushed himself up, his eyes darting around. The corridor was silent, eerie. The grotesque creature lay motionless, broken, at the far end. And from Clara's compartment, only silence. The sickly green light had faded. He stumbled back into their compartment. It was empty. The velvet berth was torn, the wood splintered, and the floor was slick with a dark, viscous residue. But Clara, she was gone. Completely. Only a lingering, faint trace of that cloying, sweet scent remained. The tiny wooden swallow, however, was still pinned to his jacket, miraculously intact, a silent sentinel. Leo found himself wandering the abandoned train, a ghost in a machine of horrors. The other compartments were equally desolate, filled with the remnants of violence and decay, but no bodies, no clear signs of what had happened to the other passengers, only the viscous residue and the lingering smell. It was as if the train had consumed them all, or they had simply dissolved. He stumbled out into the cold, pre-dawn darkness, the silence of the Hungarian countryside vast and overwhelming. The train lay motionless on the tracks, a dead serpent, its lights out, its power gone. He walked aimlessly, putting distance between himself and the nightmare, until he saw the faint lights of a distant farmhouse, a beacon of humanity. He told the authorities a story of a fire, of a mechanical failure, of a desperate escape. They found no other survivors, no bodies, only the strangely pristine compartments and the eerie, sickly sweet smell that permeated the train. They deemed it a tragic, inexplicable accident. Years passed. Leo returned to his life, built a new one. But he was never truly whole. The little wooden swallow remained on his keychain, a constant, tangible reminder of Clara, of her love, and of the horror he had endured. He never took another train. He avoided enclosed spaces, the smell of wilting flowers, and he never slept soundly through the night. Sometimes,